All right, you ready?
Ready. Do it. I love it.
You're impressed, aren't you?
That's our new intro. Just heard that then.
Just
And I love it. It's great. It's not quite the heavy metal banjo that we planned for.
no, I've been working on that. Couldn't quite get it, but this is kind of Western vibe,
Yeah.
royalty-free music to start
Great.
off with. But I will continue working on it.
Yeah.
But I just thought I'd just drop that in,
No, I think it's good. I
just
think
get
it's good.
people
Yeah.
in the mood. I like that little train vibe that's coming in,
Nice.
like we're robbing a train there. Hello and welcome to the Brothers Gaden podcast, the podcast where we look at creating better human beings. So we're really looking at how do we create more prepared, more resilient, more responsible human beings. My name is Stuart, aka Gads the Younger, and with me is Anthony,
Afternoon. Welcome to a new podcast.
Gads the Older.
Yes.
So today I'm going to ask a question. How ready do you think you are right now to survive an emergency? Let's say it's a knife-wielding maniac walking into the cafe that you're in. Let's say it is a horrific car accident that you're either involved in or you come across. Or maybe it's a fire or an earthquake, catastrophic events. How ready are you personally at a moment's notice, ready to dive into one of these emergencies and lend assistance? Or perhaps even be the critical factor in saving people's lives? If you're not ready to face an emergency, the question is, how do you become ready? And I think that's what we're going to attempt to broach an answer at today.
Sure. Not just that, but I think, like, how do you not create emergencies? So a lot of people just, by their nature, can create things that might not be an emergency. So how to circumvent them, get around them in the first place, just with a bit of knowledge and a little bit of skill.
One thing I like to say to people, this is not my saying, I didn't come up with it, but I do like to utilize it quite a lot, is be an asset, not a liability.
Yeah.
And I often think about that. We train people, we do a lot of training for various people in various different worlds, in various different scopes. And one thing I'm always asking myself is, what does this person need to look like at the end of it? What do they need to be able to do? How do they need to act? What are the skills they need to know? How do they need to perform? And it is based on that. Like, what is it that lets someone not be a liability in a situation, rather that they are an asset and are going to aid us in a situation if we were there?
Absolutely. And even going back to our time back in the military, when you judge someone that you want on your team, I think one of the first things that you look at is, what do they value add to every situation, to the environment, and to the team at the end of the day?
So today, what we're going to talk about is what I have labeled the 4 spheres. And that is essentially the way my brain breaks up the training continuum, or the cadre, the corpus of teachings that I want to get across to people. And so I looked at it all and I said, okay, if I can categorize this, I'll split it into 4 different areas. And those 4 areas, in no particular order, are physical. So what's your physical capability, or becoming capable, or being able to do something? Your resilience, so your will to push through when things are getting tough. Your knowledge, so how much you actually know about specific things and can draw on that information to help problem solve and do other things like that. And lastly, your skills, so your actual application of that knowledge.
Absolutely. And look, I think with this, I like about this, it's not necessarily reinventing the wheel, not making up something new, but just a good way to break down all these different areas that you need. There's a lot of cross-function between them. It's not sort of like we're setting like this is the only way, but a good guideline, a good set of guidelines for someone to follow to help build themselves up.
When I was looking at this information, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of stuff that I think people need to know or be able to do. It's like a mountain of information. And so that's what I really liked about this. My brain is very simple, and I like simplicity. I like the crayon version of things.
Sometimes eating them, sometimes not.
Well, if it's there and you're hungry, it's a survival technique. So that's what today is all about, is us trying to explain this system, our system, if you will, of teaching people, and how we categorize this information, the 4 spheres. So, as an overview, the 4 spheres are essentially a way of carving up the myriad of skills and knowledge that we as individuals and as trainers find anywhere from interesting to essential. This model is based loosely on our experiences of what is required to operate in austere or dangerous environments, and on our research and experience in training thousands of humans to be better prepared. Our experience, just to touch on this a little bit, if this happens to be the first time you've bumbled into this podcast and you have no idea who these 2 fellas are chatting at you, we've got... Not to like overemphasize it or anything, but we've got between us decades of experience in austere environments, in warfighting, in combat, in disaster zones, in medical emergencies. We also both are very well practiced and versed in things like survival techniques and in human movement, how the body moves, and physical capabilities. So this is an attempt to kind of get that decades of information from our heads and impart this, get it across, and maybe add to the information that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I think when we started looking at this, it wasn't really an easy task to do. When you start looking at a lot of the things that we've learnt and covered over the years that we teach, there's a lot there, and we're just breaking it down as simple as we can. So allow others to follow in that footpath without maybe having to do all the hardships and headbutting along the way.
Yeah. Don't necessarily have to join the army or become a doctor or anything like that.
No.
Which, if you want to, you go for it, right?
Sure.
I'm not going to stop you, but if you don't want to, there's other paths that you can take, and this is our particular path.
Yeah.
Quite often, the end goal that I'm looking at, though, if I think about it, if I could put a scenario around this, is we have a charitable organisation that you work with quite a bit and have worked with in the past. That's MedX.
Yeah.
Yep. Do you want to just explain MedX?
Sure. So MedX, that background is they've been a volunteer organisation. They've changed their names. It used to be called Backpacker Medics back in the day, and they've done various medical sort of volunteer work around the world in those austere environments, in places remote and rural that don't get medical aid very readily. They've then developed into a bit of a disaster response to allow to get medical aid to people that don't usually see this medical aid. Example of this is working in Nepal, responding after the Nepali earthquake in 2015 and getting aid and allowing people to get some first aid and then moving them back to the central core where those bigger organisations can look after them. We then applied similar sort of principles moving across to Bangladesh, working in the refugee camps, teaching first aid to the people in the camps so they can help themselves, because we're not a big organisation. We can't stay for long and forever. Getting out in the camps, teaching the people out in the camps how to make a stretcher, run their own pseudo little ambulance service so then they can take people that are injured or unwell into those big aid organisations that are sitting out on the fringe that won't usually see these sorts of people. And we're sort of working towards how we can respond to other different types of emergency or disaster type situations where people don't get help. And all of these skills that we teach here are involved in preparing people, and we look for people with these sorts of skills and attributes in the organisation that we do.
So just before we launch into what the 4 spheres are and pull them apart a little bit, what you're talking about there is really the crux of it for me. When I'm picturing this person that I go, right, I want to get this person ready to do that, and they're going to come overseas with us. I don't want, for example, if we look at the physical side of things. I don't want somebody coming with us, being deployed to Nepal at elevation, having to be in an austere environment and do arduous tasks day in, day out. I don't necessarily want somebody who's not physically fit, because they're going to be a massive drag. They're going to actually pull on our resources and our ability to do what we need to do. So that's part of it, is getting somebody ready, in this case, in the physical sense. So I'm quite often thinking about that. What does it take to get somebody ready at a moment's notice? Because disasters don't happen when we're ready. They happen whenever they happen.
Yeah.
And so we need to be ready to deploy anywhere in the world at a moment's notice, and to go in there and support ourselves as well, not go over there and drain the resources of that local area. So support ourselves to a certain extent and help out people.
Absolutely. I mean, this corresponds with our sort of view when we're looking for people, as I say, in the military, that value add to all of these. With the training we've got here, yeah, you're going to need these essentials just to get you off the ground, but there's lots of rooms to specialise within those as well, and you can value add in other various ways. But it's vitally important. Every scenario that we've ever been in with MedX is that we are self-sufficient for the entire time we're there. We take all our own food, all our equipment, and yeah, the worst case scenario would be if we get over there and we start drawing on a system that is already suffering. So that's what we're working towards.
Well, without any further ado then, let's jump into the 4 spheres, which is a somewhat scary look into the inner workings of my brain. So without any, in no particular order, as I said, the 4 spheres are the physical, the resilience, the knowledge, and the skills. So all of these actually interact and they all work together. But as I said at the start, this is a little bit of an arbitrary delineation between the skills, so we can actually focus. Part of my background is in sports and exercise scientist, and part of that is looking at how you actually train people to peak performance. So that's the physical side. But also when you're doing that, you learn that something called periodization is actually pretty cool, pretty important. It's at least a tool that you can use. In order to do that, you need to categorize what you're actually working on. We can't work on all things at once. It's just no human being, or very few human beings, I would say, have that sort of resource. Unless your last name is Wayne and you live in a manor and your parents are dead and you've got billions of dollars and nothing but time to train and do stuff.
I believe he still used periodization throughout his training.
And steroids?
Oh, bucket load, but
it was a cheat. Right, so first off, we're going to look at the physical side of things. So physical training, this can be a pretty difficult one to actually pull apart, but I really thought about, again, what is the outcome that I want to see in people or in myself? So how do I train? What do I train for? What sort of things am I focusing on? Because again, I can't focus on everything. And if I'm just left to my own devices, I'll probably only focus on the things I like, the things I'm actually okay at, or the things I want to work on. So this is a way of having a look at all the physical capabilities that you might actually require in an emergency situation, and probably taking it to an extent of if you're working as somebody in the security field as well. So there are things like combatives in there, which have an obvious extension to them, like that you would have an application, for them. But a lot of these things are just things that I have actually utilized when in a dangerous environment, be it in the military, be it fighting bushfires, attending emergencies, car crashes, things like that. Just being overseas, doing security sort of stuff. All these sorts of things I've actually utilized in one shape, way, form, or the other.
Yeah. And I think an important part of this is also knowing your parameters, knowing your limits. How far can you walk? How far can you run? How much can you lift till you reach your limit, and knowing to work within those parameters once you've established them.
Well, on that too, the idea that there is a goal and you have to hit it, certainly everyone's different. And there's always going to be strengths and weaknesses. Okay, I just physically will not be able to outrun a lot of human beings over a long distance. My body just isn't built that way. Okay, I'm not a long distance runner. I'm not going to be able to run for 3-4 hours, be able to do 25 kilometers. That's just not me. I can sprint though, and I can pack march. So I can put weight on my back and I can carry that weight for a long, long time. Everyone's got strengths and weaknesses, but there are certain things, and especially like I was saying, there are things that I'm weak at that I have to work on in order to get what I would consider a minimum standard. And again, I think about like, well, what would I have to do in the field? What would somebody have to do in the field? And that kind of builds in these minimum standards.
Yeah, I think again you have to know your limits, what that basic standard is, and then be able to measure yourself against that, and then finding out, right, am I going to work on to improve that particular standard, or am I just going to be stable here and I'm happy, and then work in other areas?
So if you just flick this over to me now, I'm just going to prattle off some of these things just so people can get a bit of an idea of the how these things sort of branch out. So really, I branch out into subsections of what I would call physical capabilities or being able. Agility, speed, power, strength, endurance, flexibility. I think they're probably the most important things to me, or that really covers off most movement patterns that you're going to get. And then they split out. So being able to catch and throw, react quickly, sprint, jump, dynamic type movements. So you type muscle up. So a lot of climbing type stuff that actually goes in there. Being able to lift and carry things over a period or a time. Being able to physically fight. So whatever that looks like, but some sort of combative. Hiking, running, swimming. And then going into the flexibility sort of stuff, which is more focused training, I think, on a specific thing that doesn't necessarily have a tangible outcome, except it just aids everything else and increases longevity. Longevity and recovery are actually quite important components. Finding that out as I get older and older, that recovery is part of training. It is an essential part of training, and longevity is also an essential part of training. Right. So, anything else you want to talk about with physical, or we'll jump into the next sphere?
No, let's get into the next one.
All right. So the next one I'm going to talk about is resilience. So this one started off in my head as like just a side sort of thing for catching other weird things that I do that aren't necessarily focused on this sort of training outcome. But really, after I started doing it, I found that this is a real core part of it. In fact, if I think about survival, quite often I will be talking or teaching classes about survival and talk about the will to survive, the motivation behind surviving. That's where I think this actually is encapsulated within this area. And just if people haven't heard this before, when you're thinking about survival, equipment is good. Having the right equipment is cool. That's great. But no amount of equipment is worth anything if you don't know how to use it. So the knowledge and the skill to actually use it is key. But beyond that, if you don't have the will to actually survive, no amount of knowledge, no amount of skill, no amount of physical preparation, no amount of equipment, cool equipment, no matter how much money you've spent on it, is going to help you if you don't have that core drive to actually survive. And a lot of people just go like, well, of course, I'm a human being and I've survived this long. Yeah, it's innate. We all want to survive. But it's really when the chips are down, when things are as hard as they possibly could be for you, that's what I'm talking about with motivation.
I think it's actually quite interesting, like resilience. There's a lot of talk about it today, a lot of people out there training it. But if you look at that internal drive, that internal resilience to keep going. So have a look at the example of the selection courses for probably any special forces around the world. You get about 10% on average that get through it. People that have an internal drive that is just inbuilt into them. We're now looking at how do we teach that and promulgate that kind of drive? How do you give people the tools to develop that drive? Because you won't read a book, you won't listen to a podcast and magically have this. It takes work. It's like building a muscle. In fact, there's science behind it that shows that areas of your brain physically develop in size, like a muscle, with certain resilience training. And then you can go on to use that to other areas of your life. But you've got to start with the toolbook first if you don't already have that internal drive, that internal resilience already.
no podcast except Jocko.
That's right.
Yeah, if you listen to Jocko, you're guaranteed to have Will, or David Goggins. Listen to that guy. Maybe Joe Rogan. I don't know. All right, so if we look at this one, this really was just a bit of a snapshot of things where I've probably got a bit of personal interest. So again, I separate this out into resilience training, mental, emotional, physical, and environmental training. So there are some things that are very based on how do I make my body more resilient, and then other things of how do I make my mind more resilient. And mind as in mental toughness, but also, I guess, well, emotional or spiritual might be another way to put it. And lacking any sort of pre-existing faith system, without that, how would I encourage somebody to build that in their lives? So some of the things that I came up with were Stoicism, Zen Buddhism, minimalism. These are things that have helped out in my life in the past. Emotional training, isolation. So actually isolating yourself. I was having a fascinating conversation about this, about Alone Australia recently with a friend. And I'm finding it a little bit hard to watch at the moment. It's not interesting enough. I hate to say it. It's just not, like Aussies, there's something I'm just like, we just don't have it. Maybe we're better on podcasts. But there's a whole heap of people that are just tapping out after 2, 3 days, 4 days, whatever. Yeah. And this person was saying to me, it's like, do they not realize they're going on a show called Alone, and the reason they're tapping is because they're alone? Like, was that...
I don't think so. I think people vastly underestimate, because we are social creatures. We like to be around other people, whether we like it or not. But I think where I've seen that come to prominence is on the Australian SAS selection course. The second phase of it, you're out there doing nav, and you're alone for days, nights on end. And when you come back from that, the amount of tents that have disappeared, people that pulled off by themselves without injury, without being told they have to leave, because they're out there second-guessing themselves alone, they just changes. Yeah.
That portion, you just reminded me, that portion of the commando selection where we went and did the NavX was my favourite part of the entire selection course, because I was alone.
Yeah.
Every other point I was afraid that somebody was watching me and they were about to kick me off. And that was the one point where I was like, nobody's standing over my shoulder right now. I feel great. I feel really good about this part. I felt a little bit worried that I wasn't going to get enough checkpoints, but I remember distinctly at one point, it was starting to get a little dark and I could have kept going, and I found this really soft bed of nettles, like of pine nettles underneath some pine trees, and I curled up there, and the sun was on me and it was warm and everything, and birds were singing. It was a beautiful memory. But isolation, that's, I, as part of my getting out of the military, I guess, I went through a number of years where I went pretty hardcore into the hippie lifestyle of sorts. And one of the things that I did in that sort of space, this wasn't necessarily hippie per se, but I went and did a vision quest. I did several vision quests where you go and sit out in the bush for 4 days and 4 nights by yourself in a 3-meter circle. You don't leave there. You don't really move and do anything. You just sit there. And you're very isolated, and you actually come up against a whole heap of stuff and a whole heap of resistances and things that you wouldn't really think about when you're constantly distracted by other things in our world. I highly recommend it. I've talked to other people that have done them and said it was the most traumatic thing they've ever done in their life. But and it may well be, but doing these sorts of practices, I think, are good of some way, shape, or form, where we can be isolated. Meditation, then getting into the physical stuff, stress inoculation and fasting, or intermittent fasting. These are things that I've done in the past. I mean, stress inoculation is a difficult one. I quite often talk about this on courses, that when we put people under the pump, maybe we start doing some blank firing exercise or something like that, and their adrenaline kicks in, and they're people that haven't really experienced a lot of adrenaline type situations in their life. They are totally gassed, like sucking in air, like out of their minds. And it's just 5 minutes has changed them from a normal, everyday mundane human being to this absolute deer in the headlights where they're like, whoa, I need to reconsider everything that I'm doing in life right now. And they go, how do you get better at this? And I explain the idea of stress inoculation is getting your body ready for this reaction. And I usually say it's got two parts to it, and that the military is very good at doing this. Mm-hmm. First is physical training, because physical training emulates what the effect on the body is of an adrenaline dump. Or, to put it actually correctly, the adrenaline dump is emulating what your body needs to be at, i.e. at its peak physical ability straight away. That's one part of it. And if you train in that way, let's say similar to what we would call Metcon training, or if you want to put a trademark on it, CrossFit maybe. If you train this way regularly, then your body becomes accustomed to being in this zone. You go like, oh yeah, this is another session. Right, I'm not freaking out. My heart can go up to 180 beats per minute. I'm not going to die right now. I'm a little bit used to this. The other part of stress inoculation, though, is psychological, which I think is actually pretty difficult for us in our world, in our society, to emulate. Agree, disagree?
In a way, yeah. Look, to practice it. I just want to go back to the point of that term, adrenaline dump. And you're right. It's another muscle that needs training. So if you think about like a baby snake, they come out, they are all full of venom, and it's more dangerous getting bitten by a baby snake than it is an adult, because a baby snake has no control. When it bites, it dumps everything into you, and you're toast. An adult snake, they'll bite you, and they might put a little bit in venom. They might not put much at all. They regulate how much compared to the animal that they're biting and what effect they want to have. This is similar with the amount of adrenaline, like getting inoculated, learning how to utilize your adrenaline. You can practice how much adrenaline pumps through your system. Have a look at someone that's been stress inoculated or had experience in these sorts of fighting events or something like that. Their amount of adrenaline that courses through their system is much less because they have more control over how much they put out.
That description too, I really like that, the baby snake. When you were saying that, it made me think of my fighting style.
Baby snake?
Baby snake.
All
snake.
out?
Yeah. I'm not good enough at fighting, so I can't grade myself. So it's binary. I'm either not fighting, or if I do start to fight, I'm like
all in.
I'm trying to gouge eyes and like bite testicles off and stuff. It gets pretty crazy. I'm not good at sparring. Just put it that way. I need more training.
More work in your own time.
Yeah. Environmental being the last one. Heat and cold exposure, two of my faves. I've got an infrared sauna. I've got a plunge pool. I live in a cold climate. I love getting out there, shirt off, no shoes. Go out the back to get some wood for the fire. And instead of rugging up to go out, every now and then just test myself out. Cold showers or finishing off your showers cold, this sort of stuff. These sorts of things. I mean, there is a mountain, a growing mountain. I'll say it's more than a hillock. It's a large hill, but it's growing into a mountain of peer-reviewed journal articles of scientific evidence that is telling us that this kind of contrast therapy, hot, cold, and just by themselves, training with saunas or utilizing saunas, utilizing cold exposure does have beneficial effects if we do it in the right way.
Yeah, and mental and physical effects. And even when I think back to when we were doing a lot of work outdoors all the time, so you freeze at night, you get up, you get cooked during the day, but I feel like the increase of your endurance, your ability to operate out in the bush, out in the jungle, increases exponentially to that cold and heat sort of change. So, I mean, there's temperature exposure or contrast therapy right there, but there is an growing mountain of evidence on the contrast therapy and how beneficial it is in any number of ways. But yeah, we can talk about that later on.
Yeah. Just to touch on it though, like the one thing that I always think when people go like, why do you get in an ice bath? And the one answer, rather than go through all the benefits scientifically, like the physical benefits, the psychological benefits, things, I just go, it sucks. And they're like, I don't. You didn't answer my question. Why do you get in? I go, I get in because it sucks, and that makes everything else suck less. that when I'm comparing it, later that day, I'll be doing something. I'm like, fuck, this is hard, and then I'm like, but I did an ice bath this morning, so I know I can do hard things, right?
Yeah.
I know I can deal with the suck.
Yeah.
So here we go. And as opposed to days where I don't do it, or I go periods where I don't do it because I don't do these things all the time every day. I'm not as disciplined as some other podcasters. I do notice the difference. I do notice that I get soft and doughy, and maybe it's just a placebo-esque effect, but a placebo effect is still an effect.
Yeah, look. I think have a look at the research out there. It's not just a placebo effect. There is a definite effect. There's definite effects. They're taking pictures of people's brains and MRIs. They're showing that these like parts of the brain are growing. Your prefrontal cortex gets more developed. It gives you more control. Your angular singular gyrus in the middle, which controls a lot of your emotions, that develops and gets bigger by doing these exercises. So it is, if you don't train at it, you get atrophy. If you do train at it, it gets bigger.
Nice. All right. Jumping into the next sphere now, we have the knowledge sphere. So being ready. I like that term, being ready. It reminds me of Baden-Powell. Sir Baden-Powell.
Yeah, be prepared.
Be prepared. Scouts, right? And that's what this was all sort of about for me. Having the knowledge, trying to create a library within my head. Of course, I have books. I have access to the internet. I have mountains of papers and things like that I can read through. But trying to commit some of that stuff actually into memory, I think is really worthwhile because it's the key step in taking that information and actually turning it into the next sphere, which is skills, which I would argue is the manifestation of knowledge.
Yeah.
So this is the background sort of stuff. A lot of this is actually what I teach on courses, especially with government courses, things like that. There's a lot of this sort of stuff on there. Really good things to know, and this helps with problem solving. So when I find I get stuck somewhere and don't have whatever resource I needed, then being able to fall back on this knowledge is what actually allows me to solve that particular problem. So in no particular order again, things like research, planning and preparation. So how to actually create plans for where we're going, like risk mitigation models, equipment. So knowing what equipment does what, where you can access equipment, how equipment works and things like that. Communications, different forms of communications we can utilize. Transport vehicles, knowing how they work and how to set them up. Navigation is actually quite a big one. Knowing how to navigate in various ways and to explain that, if people are thinking like, yeah, sure, you just punch something into Google. Yeah, that is the main way I do it nowadays, all right? I'm not sitting in my car with a compass and a map and shooting an azimuth or something, my sextant. I am utilizing the modern things that we have today. That's what I'm doing. But I also can read a map. I can map to ground. I can shoot a bearing. I can walk paces. I am not very good at it yet, but I can recognize some constellations in the sky and roughly understand what direction I'm heading in.
Yeah.
Navigation is a huge thing, as I said. Getting more into your sphere here, medical sorts of things, so physiological and psychological medical stuff. For me, this was the real key one was when I was studying sports science and looked into systemic anatomy and physiology and just understanding how all this fits together. Once I got, again, my knowledge of this is not as deep as yours, but once I got an understanding of that, that really was the key that unlocked a whole heap of first aid for me. So problem solving for human bodies.
Yeah. And that is what they call primary principles, is what they base a lot of medicine off. So, yeah, you can't remember everything, but if you can have a bit of an idea of how the system works, how that anatomy functions, then you can work your way through and problem solve to an answer.
The psychological sort of side of things when working in dangerous environments or high-threat environments, austere environments, whatever you're going to call it, stress responses, how humans work, what human behaviour is as well. These are two particular areas of very high interest for me, because this is kind of subtly what I'm trying to teach when I'm teaching. I'm trying to understand, how do we as humans respond under stress in a dangerous situation? How do we respond better? How do we change that response if we need to? And then human behavior, well, if I'm looking at threats in the world, generally I'm looking at humans. And if it's not a human initiated threat, it's usually a second order effect of human beings being human beings.
Well, biggest threat to another human is another human.
Yeah. Sharks. No, humans.
No, definitely not.
Sharks with wings.
Well, that might be close second.
Yeah. It's coming. Did you see there was like spiders with wings in the east coast of America? There was like some huge amount of them that had popped up or something.
Spiders shouldn't have wings.
No, I agree. Yeah, nightmare fuel. Anyway, yeah, human behavior, understanding how humans act and some of the things that they do. Really, for me, this is about trying to identify somebody who might be a threat to me. So looking for things like pre-incident indicators, how people act, the things that they say when they're trying to manipulate another human being. And then I've just got a section that I've loosely labeled threats. And so it's learning more about how to deal with particular threats. So an example of this is what I just said. If I'm going to be in and around an urban environment and I want to not get attacked by people, I want to learn what are the things that person or those people are going to display beforehand. If I'm going to tackle wildfires or bushfires, as we call them here in Australia, I want to learn how fire works, what it's going to do, how it acts in certain conditions. So this, natural disasters is one. Being that you've worked in earthquakes, I've worked in bushfires, in floods. So we've had a fair amount of experience in natural disasters, and I mean, Australia, we're going to have them, right? But all around the world, obviously, and I think this is actually something that's probably going to increase. We're going to see increased effect of natural disasters in the future. Yep. So understanding how they work and the dangers that can come with them. Active assailant or conflict zone, so human beings, spreading little hot bits of metal around quickly. Protest, demonstrations, riots, again, I think a threat that is on the increase right now. Something that we'll see more as there's more general anger throughout the world. And then pandemic and disease. That's funny. I actually wrote this years and years ago. I only just realised that was in there. I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
It's always an inevitable problem.
Yep.
Look, I think with these, like a lot of that encompasses the idea that touched on before, was about how to take something and not turn it into a disaster. How to thwart or get around and not have a disaster happen in the first place, because you have the knowledge to plan, you have the knowledge to navigate, so you don't get lost. So now you're no longer in that disaster that can be self-created a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, one of the things when I'm teaching journalists or media crews, so people from the media who are going to go over to these sorts of areas that I was just talking about and report a lot, one of their favourite sayings, I picked it up off the media, but I give it back to them all the time: don't become the story. So you're there to report the story, not be the story. So that's what this is all based about, is like you're going there to, or in our example, help. We're going there to help. Don't be the one who needs help. Or from the media crew, you're going there to snap photos of people in distress and at their worst. Don't become one of those people.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right, let's jump into the last sphere now. As I was saying, this is more of the manifestation of knowledge, I guess, where we're actually utilizing the skills. So usable skills, what does it actually look like? This is where the rubber hits the road, really. And I'm going to use probably some of these to show you how all four of these spheres are simultaneous and they all work together. They can't really be separated, but like I said, arbitrary lines that I decided to draw here. Situational awareness is right off the top here. That's the first one. Situational awareness, which is such a buzzword. Such a buzzword when it comes to the security world.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, it's not difficult to explain really, but it can be difficult to impart it or change it. And I've got it here as a skill, not as knowledge. I think that's the difference that I see a lot. A lot of people think of situational awareness as something that you read in a book. Right, I've got it now. It's like Neo and the Kung Fu from the Matrix. Like, I know Kung Fu because I just got downloaded into my head. It's something, I often describe it as a habit. It's a practice. And it's something that took me years to develop.
Yeah. A lot of people use it as a describing word, but it's a verb. It's a doing word. It's something you have to do over and over again. And it covers a lot of these areas that we've just talked about. I mean, having self-awareness, situational awareness, and expanding that awareness from there.
So, if you're expecting some sort of like deep dive into situational awareness, this is not the podcast, but we'll just leave that one there. The next one I've got is defense, and I've separated that into self-defense and area defense. So how do we defend an area or a space or a structure? How do we defend ourselves personally when we're out moving about? And then it's branchiated from there to armed, unarmed, edged weapons, long arms, short arms, blah, blah, blah. I don't have axes or longsword on there. So I'm going to have to update that.
Deficit, yeah. Edged weapons.
Yeah.
That should come under there.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Yeah, definitely does have an edge. So just learning different types of self-defense, I guess, and the how to actually build defense in depth around structures. Next up is, I would argue, one of your favorites, medical. So we had the medical knowledge that I was talking about before, but this is actually like, how do we, like, you can know how a internal combustion engine works, but not know how to pull it apart and fix it. It would help, but likewise, you could know how a human body works, but you don't know the actual techniques to plug the holes.
Yeah. There's a difference between knowledge of medicine and knowledge of procedures of medicine and how to apply it in the right space and the right time.
So I've got in here like basic first aid as a starter. I think should be a bit of a gimme for people to learn. Like, it's a pretty easy mark to get. And once you've got that and you're starting to understand it, you start to link it with, like I said, after I learnt systemic anatomy and physiology, then I could extend that basic first aid out. I wasn't just being told, pump the chest X amount of times per minute. I was understanding why you would do that, how you do that, and when you would not do that. Especially when I started to learn tactical first aid from the military standpoint.
Yep.
You got a hole in the chest, you're probably not going to start CPR on someone.
No.
Remote area first aid. So we're thinking about now with first aid, it's very much usually kind of urban-esque environments, permissive or benign environments, and an ambulance is on its way. What happens when that's not the case? What happens when we need to sustain a life for longer than half an hour or 2 hours or 2 days?
Yeah. I mean, you could break that down into extended care first aid and probably improvised first aid as well. What you need to do to get things done when you're in those remote rural environments that don't have the same facilities, don't have the same equipment and that with it.
The bush mechanics version of human bodies.
Yeah.
And then advanced intervention. So when I'm thinking about this, like it's kind of going through like, oh yeah, here's the basic thing you can do for someone. Here's how you stop them getting worse. Let's take a sucking chest wound, for example. Like you just seal it, right? You seal that the box. You seal the hole that's in the chest. But the next thing you might want to think about, if you've got the ability to do it, is maybe needle decompression or something like that. I don't know.
Needle decompression, chest drain.
Yep.
Finger thoracostomy, putting a finger through the side of the chest. There's heaps of things you can do advanced on that. And that's just in that one little example. But yeah.
And in that one little example too is why I don't really dig medical stuff and first aid. It's gross. Movement. So looking at different forms of movement. Now this might seem like a weird one. Like, why isn't this under physical capability? Because on here is movement on foot, but it's about knowing the techniques around it and employing the techniques around it. So pack marching, like how to pack your pack, how to wear it properly, how you're going to actually walk and walk at speed if need be. Things like, I just got here parkour, but urban movement, moving through an urban environment efficiently. And then vehicles as well. So cars, motorcycles, boats, etc., like how to operate them, being able to drive them. So an example of that might be doing a driving course, doing a tactical driving course or an advanced driving course.
I think vehicles even have first principles. I remember when I was growing up, look, we used to pull apart lawnmowers and things like that and rebuild them. I used to pull apart motorbikes, strip them down, rebuild them, sell them, get the next one, rebuild it, and knowing what to do when your vehicle breaks down. So is it, an electric problem? Is it a petrol problem? And how to work your way through it. I think that's super important for vehicles. And you can use how to each vehicle work. You can apply those principles to a car, to a motorcycle, to a boat, to a helicopter, maybe a plane.
Yeah. Yep. And this is, again, like now you're starting to see how the knowledge of how a car works, which would be in that knowledge section, so reading up on that or doing a course on that, then now aids in the actual skill, so that the capability of doing it. And if I tie in the others as well, if I've got to change a tyre on a Land Cruiser 79 series and it's at night and it's muddy and raining, that's going to be physically hard. So I need physical capability to do that. On top of that, I don't know if you've ever tried to change a tyre in the mud when it's raining and cold, but it kind of drains your will to live a little bit. So the resilience training comes in here. It's like, no, I have to get this done, like my will to do it. So you can start to see, like just in that example there, how all four of these actually tie together and each one bolsters the other one up. All right, next up is escape and evasion. So here I've talked about things like entry and escape from different areas. Maybe things like how to circumvent areas that you have been kept out of. How do I say picking locks without saying picking locks? In a legal way. Picking locks in a legal way.
Alternate entry, lock bypass.
Yeah, lock bypass, or just getting through doors. A little bit of stuff on surveillance, counter surveillance, I think is good, and then again movement in urban terrain, so knowing how to move through those areas at speed. Then we get into, this is already the sexy stuff, but sexy stuff for me, survival, which I separate into urban and wilderness survival. Wilderness survival, I'm not going to harp on too much. Everyone should, well, maybe not should, but there's plenty of resources out there on wilderness survival. Food, water, shelter, fire sort of stuff, hunting, foraging, all that kind of stuff. Urban survival, I think, is something that not fewer people really talk about. It is definitely talked about, but fewer people definitely talk about that. And then I've got fieldcraft stuff. So the lessons that we personally have learnt through the military, through our upbringing as ne'er-do-wells, as kids who used to like dressing up in black clothing and black balaclavas and climbing, scaling fences and sneaking into places. And scouts as well.
Yeah.
So all these things that we've just loved doing all throughout our life, but things like camouflage, and again, this applies to urban and wilderness sort of things, camouflage, camping, shelter, navigation, all these things like by day and by night. employing these techniques, how they might change from an urban environment to a wilderness environment. But people don't think about these things a lot, like how to actually camouflage yourself, what that actually means, which then delves into how do human beings see things? What is it that we notice that attracts our attention? Because if you know that, which is part of knowledge, if you know that information, then you can then counter that. So I go, okay, the human eye is attracted to patterns and it is attracted to shape and it is looking for certain things. If I can break up my shape, if I can change the pattern, if I can not silhouette myself, if I take away things like shine now, and if I move in a certain way, it's going to decrease the chance of somebody actually seeing me or attracting attention.
Absolutely. So I think like this component of it builds on the knowledge, and it's the actual doing part of the knowledge. You can read a book on any of all this stuff, but unless you get out, get your hands dirty, go and do it. Get out there in the weeds and woods and change that tire or do whatever you have to do. The knowledge is all just academic, and you need to prove it, and you need to reprove it over and over again to build up skill, because skill takes time.
Indeed. All right. Well, that is the 4 spheres in a nutshell. Anything you want to add to that?
No. I think, look, that gives a good way to break down, a good sort of pathway to start the basis of any sort of learning to build a capable human being that does not create disasters, but adds to the environment around them.
Well, the next thing that would be in my head if I was listening to this podcast is, how do I access this? How do I get a hold of you? How do I do this training? And that's a very good question, because you can't. All right? It's not doable. No. We are in the midst at the moment of creating a multi-layered, multifaceted training opportunity, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Through online courses, through a physical location, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
And also, like, if you really want to delve into it and wanted to hit us up and get more catered one-on-one training, that is also available. But right now, we're in the midst of converting from working for higher organizations to working more towards actual human beings, not the faceless corporate public.
Which I think is exciting. So that's something to look out for in the future. Look out for the website. Look out for the podcast.
Yeah. And if you are interested, I'll leave all the details down in the show notes and stuff below, so you can contact us. We can get and have got courses up and running if people can get enough human beings gathered together in the one spot. We'll go around to probably Capital City or something like that and put on a little song and dance.
Excellent.
People. A little bit of a splash on it. But yeah, that's it for today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard and you want to hear more, please do the subscribe, like, thumbs up, bell icon, star. I don't know. I don't know what platform you're listening to this on, but there's a whole myriad of things. But spread the word. Give us the joy of getting those little likes and stuff like that. Not that I really care about people liking these videos so much. It's just more about we want to try and get our knowledge, our teachings, our stuff out to more people. So that would be helpful if you could do that.
Excellent. All right. Catch you next time.
See you next time.